there's this major break in our ancestral psyche. We couldn't use these plants anymore.
Hello, friends, and welcome to Medicine Stories, the podcast where we are remembering that story is medicine, magic is real, and healing is open-ended and endless. I'm Amber Magnolia Hill, and today I'm talking to Kathryn Solie all about poisonous plant medicine. And of course, I'm thinking about Samhain coming up, Halloween, this very pivotal, very sacred time of year that I think no matter how you feel about either one of those holidays, which have come to be conflated into one, you can feel it. There's just something magical about October and late October and early November, and our ancestors felt it too. And something that I always recall learning about. It was in the book Witchcraft Medicine that I read about 13 years ago when my oldest was a baby. And in the show notes for this episode, Kathryn and I have shared, I think, 5 awesome books about poisonous plant medicine. So that book is there. It's written by 3 German scholars. It's not like a modern Wicca pagan book written by some 22-year-old. It's really a neat deep dive into European uses of plants, and especially in in the old days, in the old ways, and in the wise women who were named witches and sometimes persecuted, killed, burnt alive for their knowledge of herb lore and healing and control over big things like life and death. And one of the things I always remember learning about that book is where this idea that we have today of Halloween witches flying on their brooms came from. And it's really tied into the poisonous plants, many of which we'll talk about today, and how these wise women would use them in ointments, because of course you don't want to take these internally in any regular dose that you would take for any other herb. Kathryn and I talk about that, so please always consider safety first when working with poisonous plants, just essences basically, or topical ointments. And that depending on the herbs they worked with, they would induce visionary states, and that these visionary states were likened to flying. And, the broom association is being associated with the hearth and the home, and just like taking care of everyday business and everyday life within the family, within the village and the community. And it's really fascinating looking into the history of witchcraft in Europe and the witch trials and the burnings, and it goes so deep, and really there's this huge association. It wasn't just that these were wise women and healers, although of course there was that too, but with Christianity and patriarchy coming down so hard, it was specifically this accusation that these women were engaging in sexual contact with the devil himself, which it just sounds so absurd and insane to us today, because it is. So you can really, when you realize that that's what these church fathers were believing, were writing books about, or sharing about, you can start to understand why they came down so hard on these women who simply had knowledge of healing plants. So I just wanted to start this off with that tiny little history lesson. There's a million books, podcasts, things you could dive into if you want to know more about it. It's hard to learn about. It's really sad. I don't use the word witch for myself. I know a lot of people just love it, and it feels so empowering for them to reclaim that word, and I get it. Like, it's fine. I see the beauty and the power in that word, but just knowing so much as I do about the history of the Christian persecution, and that word is just too heavily weighted for me with that. And again, I understand the reclaiming that people are doing around it, but I cannot untangle it from the history that I'm aware of. So I just continue to be an herbalist, be a mother, be someone who's interested in healing with plants of all kinds, including the poisonous plants. So I'm really excited about today's interview. And I want to tell you about the 2 Patreon offerings that Kathryn has made available for patrons of this podcast. And actually, it's a giveaway again. And so giveaways are always available to everyone, not just patrons. You can find it and enter the giveaway at patreon.com/medicine stories. Oh, by the way, it just hit over 1,000 patrons last night. It was at 1,006 last I checked. And that's amazing. That's a big turning point. It feels so good. And I'm so grateful. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So Kathryn is offering 2 different things and 3 of each of these 2 different things. So 6 people will win. One of the offerings is 3 spots in her Introduction to Poisonous Plant Medicine online course. In this 3-hour online workshop, you will get an introduction to practices of plant spirit medicine and poison as medicine. We will discuss the history, lore, and medicinal use of poisonous plants and fungi such as Belladonna, mandrake, Datura, the yew tree, and fly agaric. Through the lens of plant spirit medicine, you will experience their medicine and messages without having to ingest them. The second thing is 3 bottles of her essence blend called Shining Darkness, a poison garden blend. The Shining Darkness is an essence blend designed to guide us through the dark, circuitous passages of our own being, for it is in these dark chambers that we find our wholeness. These plants won't do our work for us, but they can help us to discover deeper levels of sensuality and embodied communion and connection with life. The ingredients are essences of Datura stramonium, Datura inoxia, henbane, hellebore, belladonna, yew tree, and water hemlock in brandy. And I love this Joseph Campbell quote she has here in the listing. The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. So Kathryn has dedicated her life to the study and practice of non-duality and inner work. She is the author and illustrator of Here You Are, a collection of original minimalist tantric paintings and straightforward non-dual writings designed to guide you into the present moment, into your body, and into your heart. She teaches classes on topics such as meditation, poisonous plants, and myth. Kathryn also works one-on-one with people looking to remember their authentic selves through the use of tarot readings, dream interpretation, herbal medicine, intuition building, mindfulness, shamanic journeying, creative expression, and meditation. She graduated with a degree in fine arts from Naropa University, a Buddhist-inspired university in Boulder, Colorado, and did a sacred plant medicine apprenticeship with the Gaia School of Healing in Putney, Vermont. She recently finished a training in Hakomi, a type of mindfulness-based, body-centered psychotherapy. Okay, before we hear the interview, I just want to let you know that I've been going through some things in my personal life. I don't know if I will share them. It was actually hard for me to record the intro up to this point. I had to stop because I felt winded. And I'll be fine. I'll be fine soon. It's a short-term acute thing that will pass. And I'm also dealing with stuff with my alcoholic father who's been hospitalized a few times, and I need to go take care of some things around that soon. So I don't think that I will have an episode out in 2 weeks. It might be a month, hopefully less, hopefully 3 weeks. But I can't commit to anything while I heal myself and take care of all this logistical adulting stuff with my dad. And so before we get into it too, I just looked up the name of this book I was trying to remember, Malleus Maleficarum, usually translated as Hammer of the Witches. It is the best known and most thorough treatise on witchcraft. I'm reading from Wikipedia's page right now. It was written by the discredited Catholic clergyman Heinrich Kramer and first published in the German city of Speyer in 1487. So, I mean, what a cool name, right? Malleus Maleficarum, Hammer of the Witches. And if you're interested in diving more into this history, then you probably don't actually want to read the book. It's like, written in Latin 500 years ago, more than that. And it's really dark and hard to read. But just, diving into a little more of translations of it or how people are reading it now is really interesting. And there is a podcast episode with that name. I think the name might be Hammer of the Witches. I'll link to it in the show notes, by the Stuff to Blow Your Mind podcast. It's years old now. Many years ago, I first listened to it. But it was what first made me aware of some of the like demonic aspects of the history of witches in Europe, or, not the actual history, but the way that the church interpreted what was going on. So I'll put that in the show notes. It's very interesting. And, I'll add a link to one of the best books on like global witchcraft that I have as well. So lots of links in the show notes. I always want to send you deeper into the subjects you're interested in. And so without further ado, let's listen to this interview with Kathryn Solie. Hello, Kathryn. Welcome to Medicine Stories.
Hi, Amber. So happy to be here.
Good. I'm so happy to talk to you. It's pretty cute because the way I found you was through my husband, Owen.
Oh.
And I know you guys chat on Instagram a lot, and he was just like, are you following Kathryn? Are you following Persephone's path? And I was like, no, but I love that name. And
Oh, it's so sweet. Yeah, we have that plant spirit connection.
yeah, he's always like updating me what you're posting about and what you're doing.
Oh.
And yeah, I'm grateful because, things get so easily lost in these online realms. So it just always tunes me back in to what you're sharing, which is this aspect of plant medicine that is so often overlooked, and that really only just like a handful of people are actively sharing and teaching about. And this is the poisonous plants. So I would just love to begin by asking you to share how you came to walk the plant path, first of all, but then into this really specific realm of plant medicine.
Well, I'm someone who was talking to plants when I was a little kid.
Oh, you're one of those.
Which I don't know really where that came from, because my parents are like material reductionistic kind of. My dad's like a straight up atheist, and but I think it's just like natural that kids do that when they're left to their own devices outside. And it never fully really left that connection to plants and the interest in plants. But I didn't really get into herbal medicine. I mean, casually here and there. I lived in places where herbal medicine was commonplace.
Like where?
I lived in Boulder, Colorado for about 10 years, which it's like, yeah, herbal, everything like herbal medicine, and very, I guess, progressive in a lot of ways. Yeah. But I didn't really seriously start studying until my mid-20s. And that time period when like from, in my mid to late teen years were really a difficult time in my life. Just like very dark, very self-destructive, painful, and very disconnected. But even in those times, I still had my tree friends, like trees and plants that I would go, and I feel emotional just like thinking about it. Just go and sit with and talk to and kind of speak my troubles to. So there's always this kind of outlet and always this sense of support and safety. And like I had elders and teachers around me, trees, plants, that were so lacking in my human life the rest of my life. But in kind of response to this darker time period in my life, I got into meditation and Eastern philosophy, and spent many years like very deeply entrenched in that world. And that perspective really informs the way that I work with plants now. And a lot of that work that I was doing, I was still kind of working with the same energies. Like I was doing a lot of work with wrathful deities who in Eastern religions are, a lot of people are probably familiar with Kali. It's these kind of archetypal figures that, you know, cut heads off and wear necklaces of skulls and drink blood and live in the charnel grounds and dance in the charnel grounds.
What's that?
Oh, like cremation grounds. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Where the bodies are burning, and then a common image you'll see is like these cremation grounds, with a deity, you know, deities having sex in this, in this cremation ground with dead bodies. Not usually the dead bodies aren't depicted, but it's known that that's what's happening.
This is kind of familiar to me from my religious studies days. So are these mostly, is this mostly like an Indian or Hindu?
It's in Hinduism and in Buddhism. Tibetan Buddhism is the part that I'm familiar with.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. 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 And then when I went to herb school, like the first weekend, I think it was, I ended up meeting a poisonous plant there, and it just feels like it's just been a continuation of this kind of work of going into these quote unquote darker places, but doing so consciously.
Were you aware, first of all, which plant was it? And were you like aware as you felt a pull towards the plant and towards the poisonous plants, like, oh, this is kind of a continuation of the work I've been doing with these deities?
It was hellebore, which is a really, really sweet, has these sweet little flowers. It's also called Christmas rose because they bloom in the winter, which is really magical. Like they'll have flowers and new leaves coming up even as there's snow on the ground. Sorry, I'm trying to remember what your question was.
Were you aware of that as a continuation of what you'd been doing before?
Yeah, I think I was. It was, it's kind of just like the air that I breathe. So I don't think I consciously was like, oh, this is the same thing as wrathful deities until later, especially as I started to meet other types of poisonous plant spirits who are more wrathful. Then hellebore is like pretty sweet. Gentle.
You're also pretty sweet and gentle. At least that's how you come across, you know? Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's funny the way we perceive people and like the stories that we spin around them. And it's always funny when people tell me, this is how I think you are. I'm like, oh, well, that says more about you than it does about me. But, you know, I'm curious, like, if you think that you are that way, and if, so like, what was the connection with the wrathful deities? Why was that important to you?
Oh, it's like such a good question. I feel the sweetness in myself. And I've actually thought about this a bit because I think it's not a coincidence that I'm this vessel right now that's sharing about poisonous plants. I'm very non-threatening, very gentle, very sweet. I think, it can be hard to hear some of these messages if it's coming from a place of like intensity or aggression, like even just a mild, subtle aggression. I think we need that sweetness with the poison.
Yeah, I like that a lot because I can think of some other like poison plant teachers who I may have come across early in my herbal wanderings who just, they really like project the image of like, I wear
Hmm.
black and like
Yeah.
I'm a witch or,
Yeah.
just that is only going to resonate with some people.
Right. Right. It's kind of like preaching to the choir.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like right now these specific plants want to have a deeper reach, or not just that they want to, but that it's like necessary in our evolution that if we're going to survive as a species, we're going to have to face our shadows. We're going to have to acknowledge that we all have trauma. And and the plants, I feel like, are such a safe and loving gateway into that world. The plant spirits, when I say safe, I don't mean it's safe to ingest them. Please don't. But their spirits feel to me, very safe. And the students that I've had, the people that I've guided in doing this kind of work, I've never heard anyone have a negative experience or an experience where they felt unsafe with these plants.
Mm. Yes. Remind me if you think about it before we end to talk about like how you're working with them and that
Mm-hmm.
safety piece.
Mm-hmm.
But first, I would like to hear more about this trauma piece and how your whole framework sort of for the working with the poisonous plants is going into the darkness and really like being with the trauma and transforming it. So yeah, like you said, we can heal on both individual and collective levels.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, everyone, I'm sure, is very aware of the fact that we're living in very dark times and kind of scary times. And I think a big part of that is that we're now in a culture where there's not space to integrate traumatic experiences, and that we're having a lot more traumatic experiences than maybe we would have had in previous generations.
Mm-hmm.
Even just being aware at all of what's happening in our world is daily traumatizing. And there's so many things that we're constantly being exposed to that it's overwhelming. Like the things that we have to hold in our bodies and our systems. That is just one layer that we're all exposed to, but then we still have our interpersonal traumas. We have, big T trauma, like things like accidents or war or death or assaults, like the things that we think of as being big traumas. And most of us have at least one of those. I would kind of venture to say probably all of us have at least one of those experiences. And but then there's also little T trauma, which is just like can be a constant chipping away at your sense of self-worth, just like what I was speaking about, like seeing the news all the time, or even just being advertised to, being constantly told something's wrong with you, something is wrong with your body, something's wrong with your skin, with the way that you hold your body, with whatever, just constant advertising, something's wrong with you, something's wrong with you. Even in like herbalism, there's can be this kind of, you have to have these herbs or you're gonna die. Not that dramatic, but you're not gonna be good enough. You're not gonna be good enough, and you won't be lovable. You won't fit into this world.
Is this trauma aspect of working with poisonous plants something that you learned from others? Are other people talking about this? Is this a common approach to them, or is it really like specific to your experience and what you've learned?
I haven't really seen other people talking about this. I think that what I have seen with the poisonous plants, the way that people are relating to it tends to be not this. um, which I understand why that is. I think it's can be overwhelming. I just am imagining people even just listening to this, listening to me talk. It's like there's probably a part of you all who is overwhelmed even just hearing this, or just, I don't want to hear this. This is too much. I don't have trauma. I'm fine. Or wanting to turn it off, that kind of feeling. So I understand why it's not really talked about, but I also think that the plant spirit piece is missing. I haven't seen the plant spirit piece really worked with much in the poisonous plant community. So I think once you open the gate to plant spirit communication in relation to poisonous plants, I can't see how you couldn't make this connection. It feels so integral to these plants, to like their energy, to their spirit, to what they're putting out.
I am thinking about, so Owen and I watched a video. You did an online course. We weren't able to watch it live, so we watched it later. And we'll talk about those more at the end too. But so this one was sort of an overview of different poisonous plants. And you also have a course that goes like more deeply into some of them. And I know you do like plant journeys in that course, but in this one it is really brief, like a minute or so to just kind of close your eyes and, hold this plant in your mind or something. And so the plant was Belladonna, which I have no relationship with, really knew nothing about. And it was literally like a minute to just sit there, right? And I immediately feel the presence of an ancestor that I work with, ancient through my matrilineal line, grandmother, and just kind of understood that she was going to be making this introduction. She's a very shamanic figure. She just is like living in between worlds, hardly really even embodied on earth. She's so interesting. And she just sort of like pointed to my belly, which is a part of my body I am currently having issues with since having my second baby 3 years ago. And I just like relaxed into it so quickly and felt this like red light sort of glowing in that area. And it was like, wow, that was like just a pretty powerful experience for 60 seconds of sitting there. And then you start speaking in the class and you're like, okay, like I think what you said was like, what's one word you would use to describe your experience? And I was thinking embodiment. I just got such a clear sense of like, be in your body and like love your body. And then you start talking about Belladonna, and that's exactly like what you have gotten and what so many other people, especially women, you say, the message they get when they tune into the spirit of this plant. So I just love to hear about your relationship with Belladonna and your understanding of this plant.
Oh, Belladonna. So I want to say first, though, just to speak to that plant spirit connection that you had, it still like blows my mind. Doing that, what you did, that experience of just 1 minute of dropping in, but then also when we do like a full journey, which is like 20 to 30 minutes, and just how there's just these threads that so many people experience the same images over and over again. And I've talked about this before, so I kind of think this projection of Belladonna might be tainted for people coming to the course potentially, like if they've listened to me on other podcasts. But for a long time, people were experiencing Belladonna, and this is how I first met Belladonna, as this woman, like anthropomorphized woman in a field dancing by herself alone at night or in the forest. And that she had very little interest in interacting with people. And she would usually give like a very small amount of advice about embodying femininity or something like that, or sexuality, or embodiment, things like that. And it just, to have that same imagery come through so many different people who didn't know that that was going to happen ahead of time, just, I think about how, I think a lot of people would think that plant spirit communication is not scientific, but seeing the results that this happens, there's something there. And I taught a class last weekend where we journeyed with Belladonna, and this time there was this thread, no pun intended here, with scissors and threads and cutting of things. And that was coming up for almost everyone who shared. And it just clicked in with me. At the second person that shared, I was like, oh, this is the Latin name of Belladonna, is Atropa belladonna. And Atropa comes from one of the Greek fates, Atropos, whose job it was to cut the thread of life.
That's amazing.
So it's just, I don't know, it blows my mind. It's amazing. And it also to me shows that the plants are so willing and ready to be working with us, that they want to share these messages. They want us to be getting this. And Belladonna, is usually the first plant that I teach about in any class, because I feel like, so many people are drawn to Datura right now. There's like a huge explosion of Datura, but I have a feeling that Belladonna is like coming up, like that healing is needed. I think Datura, it's like, I can't even not cry when I even just think about Datura, just like, and I know you've talked about Datura on this podcast before, but like sweet, loving grandmother, and so needed right now. But Belladonna, you're asking to come back to the initial question about, what's the energy of Belladonna? I feel like Belladonna is really here to, at this moment in time, to help us, to guide us, to show us where our wounds are around femininity, which is very, I don't know what word to use, but dishonored right now in our world. And by femininity, I don't necessarily mean gender. I mean like that crying is not okay. That being embodied is not a part of our culture anymore. Being sensual, just like enjoying the sensuality of life without it having to be sexual, like that there's a difference. And like that we can get that kind of pleasure that's pretty much the same kind of pleasure from sex, but like from just being alive, from eating, from just enjoying, from seeing the beauty all around us, that helps us become more ourselves. It helps us become more embodied. It helps us to get more grounded here on this earth, enjoying the beauty that's all around us and sensing it, really feeling it in ourselves and our bodies. And that really needs healing right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's like so simple, and it's one small thing in a vast field of things that need healing, but just if that one thing got healed, right? Like sort of the collective feminine, and then how individual women relate with their own bodies and their own experience of embodiment, how much could change.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Were you going to say something?
I have so many thoughts about Belladonna. I have, two thoughts is one that has been surprising to me, that I have a Belladonna flower essence, and that most of the people I noticed who buy it, like the name on the shipping is male names, like it's men buying this medicine, which has been really interesting to me and surprising, but makes me really happy to see that. And the other thing's not. We'll let that go. We'll come back to that.
Okay. I was just going to say, for anyone listening who has not been blessed to sit in a like plant medicine herbal class type setting where people do either like journey with the spirit of a plant or physically sit with a plant, I mean, it happens like every time that people have similar experiences. It just, I've never seen it not happen in a class I've done. And it is so interesting what you're saying too about the message or the thing that people are getting with Belladonna shifting a little bit with your last class. And like you're saying, these conscious sentient beings are willing to work with us, and they're evolving as we're evolving, and the interplay of like the human and the plant is evolving. So, I mean, just imagine if, we were all in more conscious connection with these plants and what we would be learning and how we would be guided at this pivotal point in human history.
The world would be completely changed.
Yeah. So there's just one more little piece of what we can do. I'm curious too if you would like to share just a little bit more about Datura, because it has been spoken about on this show with Sophia Rose in episode 3 and Marie Sue, who learned about it from Sophia Rose, in episode 49, and just with this huge explosion in popularity with that plant.
Well, Datura is just a very powerful plant spirit. A lot of people are familiar with Datura through Carlos Castaneda, and unfortunately, a lot of people are familiar with it as hearing horror stories of people trying to get high off of Datura and blacking out for days.
Yeah.
And these are deliriants. A lot of these plants, they can have psychedelic effects, but they're deliriants. It's not like taking like psilocybin or LSD or something. It's not really something that should be used recreationally outside of ceremonial setting, and outside of people using it with someone who has experience, like generational experience, not just your friend that tripped on Datura one time and now is showing you how to. I feel like that's important to say because I get a lot of messages from people asking, how can I trip on Datura? And please don't.
Can I just interject real quick? I just read a random Facebook comment. I don't even think it had anything to do with an herbalist friend or anything, but someone was saying that they were moving, and their husband, just by moving their Datura plant into the car, driving it to the new house and putting it like somewhere, had to be hospitalized.
Oh my God. From breathing it in while he was in the car.
So this is how powerful this plant is.
Yeah. I sometimes I tell this story. It's just like Brugmansia, which is very similar to Datura. A lot of people think that it's Datura. It's also known as angel's trumpet. It has similar bellflowers, but bigger, and they point downwards. And for me, if I just smell a Brugmansia plant, I'm like high for like the rest of the day. They're very powerful. I've had many accidental journeys. So we need to be really cautious when working with these. But when I started working with poisonous plants, because I had a little sense of, had heard stories about Datura and how intense it was, I was like, no, I'm never working with Datura. Datura is not for me. Not interested. No, thank you. And Datura was like not having that, and just kept showing up over and over again. And I think because I felt so cautious and moved so slowly and respectfully and gently. I've never had anything but like pure, loving grandmother spirit from Datura. And I think the reason that Datura shows up and is showing up so much right now, I think it's a beautiful gateway plant into shadow work, into underworld work. I think it's probably the only poisonous plant that I feel also has this kind of, for lack of better word, like angelic energy. Like it's not just this like underworld shadow work, healing trauma. But it has that, but it also has divine, angelic kind of energy that is uplifting and heart opening and so sweet and so gentle and so beautiful. And I think for a culture that is terrified of inner work and shadow work, Datura is like the perfect gateway between those two worlds. You know, we like in self-help and kind of new age world right now, it's all light and love, and just think positive and you'll only get positive experiences. And if you have something bad happen to you, it's probably because some negative thought pattern that you have. And I don't think highly of that perspective at all.
No.
There's what happened, I think, is that there's truth in that, but it's been bastardized. It's been turned into like pithy slogans that don't really work. Like it just causes people to repress things and just be like, no, I'm fine. Everything's fine.
Yeah. Leads to spiritual bypass very quickly.
Yes, spiritual bypass and that it's like very damaging to the person doing it and also to the people around them.
Yeah,
it can be. So I think even to like a light and love kind of person, Datura's a great like opener.
Yeah, so beautiful too. Like you cannot be not touched in the presence of that flower.
And the smell. Heaven.
Yeah, I messaged you after I smelled it for the first time. Because it was the smell that, it just like transported me.
Yeah. Yeah. And in the smell, there's like the message is like in her smell, right? It's like divine, sensual darkness.
Yeah. Well, for me, I just immediately had this vision of a wormhole or a portal or just, and it was kind of like, it was like, this is what's possible here as you deepen into this relationship. But it was only the smell that brought that vision to me. It wasn't looking at it or even sitting very close to it for a while in a meditative space. It was as soon as I stuck my nose in it.
That makes me a little teary-eyed. And I think just examples like that just also prove how strong that spirit is, that particular plant spirit, like how deep their reach is and how ready they are to work with us. Like we don't necessarily have to do that much to meet that spirit.
I wanted to ask you, so this is a big conversation in herbalism, the gendering of plants and the pronouns that we use, right? Of course, related to this larger conversation we're having about human people. And, people have different arguments for different things to say. Like I still see people using she. Of course, it's mostly she. We hardly refer to any plants as males, which is interesting. Saying she a lot. And I just tend to still say it. But then, there's the school of thought that not dehumanizes, but, gives
Right.
this like inanimate,
Objectifies. Yeah.
objectifying sense to the plant. And I get that too. And so you are one of the many people who are using the gender neutral there. And yeah, I'm just curious, how you came to do that and like why that feels right to you.
It was actually henbane that opened that more up to me. To me, like Datura feels, I always meet Datura as kind of a grandmother, like a more feminine energy. Belladonna usually experiences more feminine energy. So a lot of times I use she when I'm talking about them. Lately, I've been kind of moving out of that, I think, but it doesn't feel wrong to me to use that, to use she. But henbane was just, I've never met henbane in like an anthropomorphized form. Henbane always just kind of comes as this, I don't know, I don't even know how to explain it, this kind of visions. And henbane is a poisonous plant, in case you don't know. But it didn't feel right to use gender pronouns when talking about henbane because I didn't have an experience of either masculine or feminine energy from henbane. So sometimes I use they or I use it a lot still, which I think about. I want to like stop using that, but it's so ingrained and into language. It can be hard.
Yeah.
It's like a process.
Yeah.
Unlearning.
Yeah. And I mean, language and English especially is just an imperfect medium. It just is, there's problems with like all of the things we just talked about, and ways that they're imperfect. And so I try to not get too caught up. And if I'm using it, I'm doing it in a loving way in which I totally recognize like the beingness of this plant.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't think the plants feel offended by whatever pronouns we use. I think it's more for the humans hearing it that they want inclusivity, but the plants, they don't, they're like,
yeah. They're like, please, we are beyond language.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't make sense, I'm sure, to them. Like even the idea of pronouns is like, I'm not a pronoun.
So, since you are working with and teaching plant spirits, and people working with poisonous plants will use essences like you make, or some people use creams or topical solutions. But a big aspect of your work is journeying, and it's so useful and helpful, but can feel intimidating for people or hard to get there. For me, it's taken many years of practice and like building that muscle. So I was really thinking about that when I had like that 1 minute vision. If I had been doing this for a while and trying to do this with my ancestors and with other plants, I'm not sure if that would have happened so quickly. So I've talked about that many times on this podcast, like just keep trying, just keep going there, keep, doing whatever meditation is feeling right for you. And it really is a muscle that you grow. But you have written about the work that you're doing with the poisonous plants is in part also to help revive these lost visionary lineages, especially from your my European ancestors, and these, ways that were stamped out. So yeah, I guess I just want to hear you talk more about that. Like for you, has it been a muscle that you've built over time, and how do you find that people come into that work?
Yeah, it's I mean, like I said, I was talking to plants as a kid, but it was not journeying really. I mean, it was different. But I think that having years and years of meditation practice before I started doing journeying with plants is why I was able to do it so easily. And I recommend, like at the beginning of any class that I teach, I have us do a meditation. I recommend, everybody, if you're going to be working with plant spirits, having a mindfulness practice, I think is really important. for a lot of reasons, but I think it can help also not only to quiet down the mind, but it can help you to differentiate what's projection and what's the actual plant communication. And in that same vein, I also recommend cross training with, doing inner work, doing psychotherapy, body-centered psychotherapy, because it can be really easy to project our desires and our wounds onto plants. And your other thought about the lost shamanic lineages, which I think about a lot. I think that's also part of why poisonous plants are coming in strong right now, is because I'm of European descent, mixed European, all white. I'm white, but all kinds of European descent. And, there's a lot of trauma in that lineage. I think we've been the traumatizers in modern times. But, where does that, I think you had another guest on this podcast talking about that traumatized people.
Yeah, it's come up a few times, but Lila June especially.
Yeah. So, and I think it's especially, I almost want to use the word dehumanizing. So I'm going to use that word. It might be kind of big, but to be disconnected from our spiritual lineages. Mm-hmm. So when Christianity came in and stopped the indigenous religious practices or shamanic practices, there's this major break in our ancestral psyche. We couldn't use these plants anymore. Feel really sad saying that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so many of the poisonous plants that we are talking about, and that you teach about, were specific to Europeans.
Yeah, and I feel so. Yeah, I feel that these plants are reemerging right now, because there's such a longing. There's a lot of cultural appropriation, and there's such a longing to reconnect with entheogenic plants, with shamanic lineages. And although I would definitely say that these plants are entheogenic, their lineages are gone. They're broken. We're not going to get those back. We don't have documentation. There's not lines passing down the knowledge of how these were used, how things were mixed. When you think of ayahuasca, there's a lot of things that go into that brew. There's, and I imagine it was similar with plants in Europe as well. So I think, myself, and I see other people also kind of trying to figure out, how do we work with these plants? I think it's going to be a slow rebuilding process, but as that's being rebuilt, not to say that plant spirit medicine is less than actually taking in the plant. I don't believe that at all. But we have that plant spirit medicine available to us anytime. We don't need to even have the physical plant with us. We don't even have to have ever seen a plant. A lot of times when I lead the journeys, most of my classes are online, so I'm not in person with people. And we do the journey before we talk about the plant. A lot of times people have never seen what Belladonna looks like, and then they have journeys where they still receive the medicine of Belladonna. Yeah.
And so I think you have a pretty active dream life as well, and which is not surprising. At least that you have had, some big dreams and some plant visitations in your dreams, and you specifically mentioned Amanita muscaria. I would love to hear more about that.
I also feel so much love for that little mushroom. So that was similar to Datura. I was like, I'm never working with this mushroom. Like, it makes people really sick, and I'm not touching it. And then I dreamt about it repeatedly. It kept showing up in my dreams. I would have all these dreams where I was out foraging and gathering these mushrooms and gathering them, but with the knowledge, like, I don't know how to use this. And I think I finally decided to work with this mushroom, Amanita muscaria, also known as fly agaric, when I had this dream where my my real life garden gnome gave me two dinner plate sized Amanita caps and told me it was safe to ingest them.
Wow.
But that mushroom, they show up in my dreams a lot in all kinds of different ways. I mean, all of these plants do, but I think that the Amanita muscaria definitely the most. And it's interesting. I think it makes sense that that happens because a lot of when you actually are taking the physical mushroom, the I guess I'll use the word, the shamanic experience with them often comes through sleep, through prophetic dreams that you have that I suspect you're not really asleep, but that's how it's described. So you take this medicine, you have an intention of, I want to understand something, I want to get more clarity about something, I want to, meet another layer of myself. And then you inevitably fall asleep, and through the dreams, you have images that give you your answer. That's one traditional way of working with them. So it makes sense that then they would show up in my dreams.
I'm just having a really neat experience right now. I'm not usually like playing around online when I'm talking to someone, but I was like, oh yeah, what does the angel's trumpet look like? Which that's such a beautiful Latin name too for that plant. What was it again? Brugmansia, yeah. And then I was like, oh, what does Belladonna look like again? I was looking at these images and there's this gorgeous piece of art and I click on it and it's my friend who painted it, Ben Vierling, who lives here in Nevada City.
I know his paintings. Yeah. He did the cover of this book about poisonous plants. Yes. By Daniel Shoup.
Yeah, I'm looking at Veneficium.
Yeah. Yeah, with it has like Datura and
coming out of a human heart. Yeah. These are gorgeous. He also painted the cover of Joanna Newsom's album East.
Oh,
which is amazing. Yeah, he's amazing. So yeah, these I'll put links to his work in this photo probably in the in this episode on my website. So then you did go on to work with Amanita. Yes. Yeah. Which I still have never done. And it's a being that I have never met in the wild, growing. And I literally think like all the time about when that day is going to happen, when I'm going to finally come across, because it doesn't grow here. But someday
you might have some variety.
We do,
there.
And I've never met the other variety either. But it's not the red. It's not the iconic Amanita.
They're very similar. I can't remember which one grows in California, but they're supposed to have. I notice I'm like hesitant a lot to talk about anything involving ingestion of these plants because I get worried about people misusing.
Be careful with Amanita. For sure.
I've never heard of. I don't think there's ever been reported deaths, but they can cause damage to the body and also just like be generally unpleasant if you are not using them intelligently.
Yeah. I talked about this in episode 6 with Amy Woodruff also for anyone who's interested. Yeah, and it's like I am interested in actually ingesting that mushroom someday in a very careful way, but more it's almost just like the mythic and iconic love for it, all my
Mhm.
favorite children's books and the association with Santa Claus and Christmas time and
Mhm.
having Northern European ancestry and just really I just can't wait to finally meet it.
Yeah, I hope you do
Thank you.
soon.
So let's, before we close out and talk a little bit about, the safety of these plants, I really love that, like I said, your Instagram name is Persephone's Path, like your business is
Mm.
Persephone's Path. It so fits with what you're doing.
Mhm.
And I love talking to people about the myths that they resonate with. So what is it about the Persephone story that aligns with you and your path?
Well, I think just from the first time that I heard that myth as a little kid, it always just stuck with me. I think that a lot of people have myths like that those myths that just stay in your mind that you hear at one time and you just know it. Um, and the Persephone myth was that for me. But I went, I've had many Persephone's journeys, like we all do. Like we're all having these journeys. I much prefer the the model of the Persephone's journey versus the hero's journey. Like the hero's journey where you do XYZ and you win. The Persephone's journey is cyclical, that we have periods of light, we have periods of dark, we have times where um, everything's like flowing beautifully and it's springtime and there's new blooms and life feels like fresh and good and renewed. And then inevitably we have times where things are painful and difficult and we experience loss um, and it's just the natural cycle of life, the natural ebb and flow of life. And I think we all need that medicine. Speaking about light and love, it's half of our life experience. Roughly is that springtime, that light, and it's inevitable that we're going to also have difficult times. But I guess that myth, it wasn't really prominent for me during really hard times, like as a teenager, but later it helped me to kind of sift through and see that was okay, that was just a part of my process, that was just a part of my becoming, and it's informed so much of my work. Whereas if I took the notion of the hero's journey or a light and love approach, then I would be considered like damaged, like, oh, I did something wrong, or something was wrong with me, inherently wrong with me. I had bad karma. And it's just not true. Like we all have these difficult times and it's totally normal. It's part of being human. It's part of being alive. And Persephone shows us that.
Yeah.
That we can still blossom and bloom even in the darkest time of the year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a reminder of the cyclical nature of everything, of the seasons and of our own lives and our inner experiences of living.
Yeah, and like any good myth, it can be interpreted a million different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was 2 years ago now. My now 13-year-old daughter was Persephone in the play at school.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like crying the entire time
Mm-hmm.
because of these elements of change, cyclicality, darkness, light, and then the her mother, like desperately trying to like find her
Mm-hmm.
and bring her back. And my mom had just died at that time, and I just love
Mm,
my daughter so much. So this mother-daughter element is something that I really like tuned into when she was in that play, and it's really stuck with me
yeah.
since then.
Yeah, that's an important part of the story for a lot of people. Actually, I had my mom has she had like never come to any class I ever taught or anything, and she came to one class earlier this year in the poisonous plant. I was teaching it in person in New York, and um, the 6 week course that I do, and week 3 is about the Persephone myth. And she came to that class, so she got to hear me tell this story, and it was kind of surreal to have my mom there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah.
That's so cool.
Mm,
So I think, and people hear poison, and
mhm.
I think that a lot of something I didn't realize is that these plants have different effects on the body, like digitalis
Yeah.
or foxglove stops the heart.
Mhm.
Poison
Yeah.
hemlock like slowly paralyzes the nervous system going up the
Yeah.
spine, and so you die because your lungs can't expand anymore.
That's the one that I don't want to die from.
Exactly. I mean, it's so funny
Yeah.
because when I was first getting into herbal medicine and just thinking about the state of the world, a thought I sometimes have is like, what would be the best way to kill myself if like it was that or some horrible
Uh-huh.
death? And I was like, oh, I'm like an herbalist now. Poison hemlock would be cool. And I was like trying
Yeah.
to teach myself how to identify it so I could harvest some. And then I
Mm,
learned about how it kills. And I was like, oh, never mind.
yeah. Not that
No, it's
one.
not.
Go with like, well, never mind. I'm not going to give any ideas, but I've thought about that. Like, well, if I had to die by a poison, which one would it be?
So I just wanted to like put that out there. And that's like a really interesting way to learn more about the plant too. Like digitalis affects the cardiovascular
Totally.
system, poison hemlock, the nervous system. I just like knowing those things. So
And
yeah, go ahead.
can I say something more about
Mm,
that? Is what's also interesting is that digitoxin is in like the leading heart medication. It's
right.
when we use these medicines in really small doses. So in the poisonous nightshade plants like Datura and henbane and belladonna and brugmansia and mandrake, they have tropane alkaloids, and those are used for things, all kinds of things in quote unquote modern medicine, like pupil dilation, for drying out the mucous membranes before surgery, for motion sickness, for all kinds of things. Um, so in the right dose, it's medicine, literally, physically.
Right. Yeah, and I mean,
Yeah.
nightshades also includes tomatoes and eggplants and
Mhm.
like common food
Yeah.
plants for us.
Mhm. Tobacco.
Oh, yeah. So just, a final word on safety. If you want to be working with these plants, don't take them as tinctures, don't eat them, don't make a tea.
Oh.
You can work with the spirit of the plant. And
Mhm.
it's so important what you say that the plant doesn't have to be physically present to do that.
Yeah.
Or essences like the ones that you make, or, some people make and sell like salves and creams. And I've never done
Yeah.
that. Is that something you do?
Yeah. Yeah. It's safe. It's not something you want to like overdo or do every day, but yeah, there's oils and ointments made specifically with those nightshade plants that people use for pain management, for insomnia, for headaches, for menstrual cramps. Belladonna is great for menstrual cramps,
Mm.
nerve pain, all kinds of stuff.
Wow, that's so cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's end by telling people about your online courses and your shop and like just anything else where they can find you.
Oh, I don't want to
I
end.
know.
Like we just started.
Totally. But this
Um,
is why your courses are so great because people can really go deep into these things.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, I teach a 6 week course. One is happening right now, but I don't know if it'll still be going when this comes out, but I'll teach another one early next year where each week we go into one or two poisonous plants, and we talk about the history, the lore, the mythology, the medicinal uses, and we do a plant spirit journey every week. Yeah, and I also do a 1 day workshop, which is a couple of hours, which is what you and Owen did, where we just kind of do a brief overview of a couple different plants and introduce the philosophy more deeply of plant spirit communication and poison as medicine, which is essentially what we've been talking about today, but we go a little bit more deeply into it.
And then you have your shop.
Yes, yeah, and I sell a lot of different poisonous plant essences, which essences are really safe. You don't have to worry about poisoning yourself with them. It's a good way to work with the spirit of the plant, and yeah, I don't sell any ointments or oils, but essences and other non poisonous medicines as well. And I'm on Patreon also, where I do classes every month, video classes and tarot readings on there and herbal medicine packages and things like that.
And it's all under the name Persephone's Path. People are looking for you.
Yes, it is. Yeah, and on Instagram, I'm Persephone's Path. And my Patreon is Kathryn Solie, but
okay.
It's interesting. It's so hard. This is like the hardest part, is to talk about, promote myself.
Yeah, it gets easier with time. I've found. And just trusting that people are like, with you because they're interested in what you're doing. So they want you to promote yourself so they can find more of your work. Thank you, Kathryn. I'm really excited for myself to keep learning from you and just going deeper with the plants and with my own abilities to have these visionary journeying experiences. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Amber.
Thank you for taking these medicine stories in. I hope they inspire you to keep walking the mythic path of your own unfolding self. I love sharing information and will always put any relevant links in the show notes. You can find past episodes, my blog, and our handmade herbal medicines at mythicmedicine.love. We've got reishi, lion's mane, elderberry, mugwort, yarrow, redwood, body oils, an amazing sleep medicine, heart medicine, earth essences, so much more than I can list there. mythicmedicine.love. While you're there, check out my quiz, Which Healing Herb is Your Spirit Medicine? It's fun and lighthearted, but the results are really in-depth and designed to bring you into closer alignment with both the medicine that you're in need of and the medicine that you already carry and can bring to others. If you love the show, please consider supporting it at patreon.com/medicine stories. It is so worth your while. There are dozens and dozens of killer rewards there, and I've been told by many folks that it's the best Patreon out there. We've got ebooks, downloadable PDFs, bonus interviews, guided meditations, giveaways, resource guides, links to online learning, and behind the scenes stuff, and just so much more. The best of it is available at the $2 a month level. Thank you. And please subscribe on whichever app you use. Just click that little subscribe button and review on iTunes. It's so helpful. And if you do that, you just may be featured in a listener spotlight in the future. The music that opens the show is by Marie Sue. That's MARIEESIOUX from her beautiful song, Wild Eyes. Thank you, Marie. And thanks to you all. I look forward to next time.